Welcome back to Are You a Robot? This is a series where we aim to tackle some of the most challenging questions that stem from AI, ethics, and related technologies. We're doing this by gathering some of the best and brightest minds, the thought leaders in their space around AI ethics, AI governance, and we're trying to stimulate this conversation to bring forth some best practices for the community as we move forward and AI continues to have a deeper integration into our daily lives. So we also have a Slack community that I would love for you to join. If you at all resonate with any of these topics, I implore you to get involved in the Slack community. Come say hi. Let us know what you're working on. We always love hearing different voices and opinions. That is what is needed right now. This open forum is crucial to the whole topic of AI ethics and AI governance because it is not so black and white. The last thing I will say is that we have an incredible sponsor. This would not be possible if it weren't for EthicsGrade. They are an ESG benchmarking firm that specializes in technology governance. If you would like to know more about them, go ahead and check them out in the description below. So today we spoke with Byrd, who is a UX designer by trade. We talked to him about his article that he wrote in UX Magazine about voice assistants and potential racial voice assistants. I thought it was fascinating to hear his experiences with his voice assistant, Bixby. And for those of you that don't know who Bixby is, it's the Samsung version of Siri, we could say. He also has started a company, Awari, which is a platform that is for small to medium-sized businesses that HR teams can use to monitor when there are biases inside the company by looking at their employees' texts. Without further ado, let's get into it with Byrd.
Are you a robot?
I want to welcome you, Lewis, to the Are You a Robot podcast. This is an incredible chat we're about to have. I know I have a lot of questions for you, man, and I am really excited to be able to talk to you about some of these topics that aren't necessarily brought up on a day-to-day, and I think you have a lot of insight into them. So I'm really excited to talk about what we have deemed racist chatbots, right? That might be the clickbait title for it, but I think there is a lot of truth behind it. And B, I want to talk a bit about your new endeavor that you're getting into. I want to go into that and explore the implications and also the different ways that we can move forward from all of these issues, these social issues that we're looking at, and also these artificial intelligence and data ethics issues. So thank you for being here. And it is a pleasure to start off the podcast with you. And I would love to know a bit more about you before we get into any of that.
Excellent. Well, hey, just to get started, first, let me say thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. This is something I'm very passionate about, just talking about, definitely the technology piece, the tech piece, specs or whatnot, but more so the implications of it in our society. That's what I'm really passionate about. So a little bit about me, I guess pre-interview, we were talking a little bit about that. So Byrd, I am a Kansas City, Missouri native. For those who still do not know where Kansas City is, we won the Super Bowl last year. The Missouri side, that is. We're a twin city with Kansas City, Kansas. We love them too. But that being said, I say, where should I start, man? I started out following my career, my passion in music many years ago as a music production, aspiring person, songwriter, engineer. So long story short, when I went to undergrad at the University of Missouri, Columbia, I majored in electrical engineering and math. And I had an internship at our local utility here back then. And this was around my sophomore, junior year. For a couple years, I interned, and I realized that corporate America was not for me. Working as an engineer in that capacity, that was not something I wanted to do. But
Mm.
basically, by the time I really realized that, it was too late to switch majors. It wasn't too late, but I didn't want to stay in school any longer than I had to. So
Mhm.
I went ahead and completed the program, and then graduated and moved to Minneapolis, and pursued another degree in audio production, audio engineering, because that's always been my passion, even from being
Nice.
a young kid. And it was up there where I started working with a lot of just different musicians, and I needed extra money in the studios, and they would ask questions, or in conversations I hear them say, "Yo, we have to have our album art together, and we need some
Mhm.
photography." And I had access to these tools via the school I was going to. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, "Hey, I can do it. I can do it," you know. And that, long story short, Demetrius, that's how I got into. Start off in marketing, even while I was doing the audio production, and it kind of transformed into branding. And it was like
Mm.
that branding piece really resonated with me because I was. It goes back to the engineering side of me. It's like
Mm.
analytical, solving problems, and things of that nature. And I honestly, man, I fell in love with that. So what started off as a way to kind of like um, help me with my music equipment addiction to buy more equipment.
I
It,
know about that addiction.
yeah, you know about it, right? So it was one of those things to where it led me down this path of I really enjoy working with people and helping them solve their problems. And honestly, man, when I think about even the stuff I do today with product development, and even some of the consulting things I do with companies and inclusive design, I honestly still approach it in that dual capacity as an engineer solving a problem, but
Mm.
also as a music producer, like thinking about, okay, this is the big vision we're trying to set with this song or with this
Mhm.
album. Same stuff, but now we're looking at it as this is the big vision we're trying to set with your company culture, with the organization, with the brand, and things of that nature. So a lot of times people think like, well, how are you? Where does this make sense? For me, it makes sense. It's tying both worlds together. So
Mm.
long story short, man, I had a stint working in advertising as a contractor. I saw the challenges there in terms of just kind of like inclusion. And I eventually evolved to cross-cultural strategic branding. So basically cross-cultural psychology was my framework, which focuses
Oh,
on
nice.
not what differentiates people, but what are the commonalities amongst people, and how can we really play into that and elevate that in conversations. And in that process, I was working with a lot of C-level executives and things of that nature. And often my cultural um, approach will get diluted down to, well, can you help us recruit more diverse talent?
Uh,
And it's like, okay, that's not necessarily what I'm here talking about. I'm trying to help you understand how to do better business in India, how to
mhm.
have a better connection, even across the United States, like, in different markets.
Totally.
But it was like, yo, can you help us recruit more diverse talent? And when I would challenge these executives and tell them, well, recruitment's really not your challenge. The real challenge is, what are you doing to retain people from diverse backgrounds, to empower them, to encourage them within your organizations? And that's where I saw the biggest gaps. That was the biggest gaps. It was like, you know what? Nobody really wanted to hear that part of the conversation. They just want to look at symptoms such as, oh, we
Mhm.
need to recruit more people. But when you look at the fact that all those diverse people you recruited are leaving the next year, that's the biggest issue. So, man, that's what led me to where I'm at today with my company. The current iteration of the company has always been an evolution of
Mhm.
Goodwim. Is very much focused on um, equity and inclusion and leveraging technology. So I'm gonna stop there because that was at least a good 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes talking about it. So I'm gonna
Well,
stop there, man.
I love it, man. So much good stuff there in those 4 minutes. And I want to dive into the idea of you as a designer and looking at this AI or the chatbots problem from design perspective, because
Mhm.
I think that is something that we are increasingly seeing more and more, right? As
Right.
we move forward, we realize that talking to our phone or our computer, whatever it is, that is becoming our reality more and
Yeah.
more. And it is a designer who is tasked with the job of making sure that that process is smooth. And it's like your UI, or I mean, and your UX, right?
Right.
It is the user experience, but on a different level. And so from that notion comes what you wrote about in, I think it was a UX blog post, right?
Yeah.
On
UX
the
magazine.
UX Magazine. There we go. And we'll link to that in the show notes if anybody wants to check out this article because it's fascinating. And so you were talking about Bixby, which, if anybody doesn't know what Bixby is, it is the native Samsung like voice assistant.
Hmm.
And you were talking about how you had to basically code switch. You had to lay off of your accent a little and go more neutral so that Bixby would understand you.
Yeah.
And so I have so many questions around that. Like, one is, oh, well, maybe it's just because Bixby sucks. And if you're with Siri, it's better. Or if you're with Google Assistant, it's not as bad.
Hmm.
The other questions I have around that are, well, let's just start with that first, and then I'll
Yeah.
get into
Yeah.
the next ones. Like, is it something that is just because Bixby is not that well advanced, or is it something that is universal to all these voice assistants?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. So I think it's both. Okay.
Mm,
Maybe part of it is Bixby isn't as polished as it could be potentially.
okay.
Uh, with that being said, though, when I did code switch, you said it in such a nice politically correct way. I love it. When I did code switch and basically put on, as I like to call it, my white man voice,
Yeah.
it did understand me a lot clearer though. So
Mm,
in that regard, from just a tech spec perspective, when I did the code switch, Bixby worked excellent, right?
mm,
Uh, that being said, so when I test out other types of conversational AI, so for example, I have a Jeep Grand Cherokee and it has voice recognition, which
mm.
also underlying is a conversational AI.
Yeah.
That damn thing doesn't understand me half the time either, right? I have on my home office desk, I have a Echo Dot
Yeah.
through Amazon. Tried to have conversations with it, and it struggles sometimes. So honestly, I'm looking at myself like maybe it's just me, right? Maybe I just have lazy talk, and the things don't understand me, right? But it also bears the question of okay, is it me or is it the
Mm,
technology, right? So
exactly.
the engineer slash quasi scientist in me is like, okay, maybe before I make these claims, I need to do more test to see. But I will tell you that the devices that I have engaged with, specifically the conversational AIs, many of them struggle to understand me. And like I
Mm,
said, that could be just because we're in the early years of this technology. So it may be a impact with a lot of people, and I can see that. I do know, however, that other people that I know that look like me, and for the audience who can't see me, I am a 6'3" black man from the Midwest in the United States. Um, a lot of people that I know, they also have some of those challenges as well.
mm,
So the to answer your question, I think maybe it's both. I think there's both. The technology isn't quite as advanced as it can be.
mhm.
At the same time, the technology is doing exactly as what it's supposed to do as it's been designed, and that kind of ties into the challenges I think that we're going to talk about in this conversation.
Yeah. Well, and the first challenge that comes to my mind is these chatbots are produced or they are created with data, right? It's just
Right.
millions of people that are talking to their phones or their Bixby or refrigerator in your case.
Yeah.
And and they are creating the knowledge that is what we are seeing from all these different pieces um, of technology, right?
Right.
And what I am wondering is, going back to your idea of how you were trying to help companies be more culturally diverse and in a way more advanced in that um, mindset. I'm wondering about this as well. Is it just because we need more data, or is it because we need more engineers that or are more diverse and they're going to program in more better algorithms, or is it because we need higher level? We need the C-suite to not just be whitewashed. What is it, or is it a little bit of everything? Right?
Mhm.
What is that going to look like so that we can see a change in these different types of technologies, especially like one thing that I think is fascinating is that this African American vernacular English, as it is
Yeah.
called,
Yeah.
there's like 43 million people that speak this dialect of English, right?
Mhm.
And Poland has less of a population than that, but Poland gets its own language support for Siri, and
Yeah.
we don't see any language support for this African
Yeah.
American vernacular English.
Yeah.
So, what is it going to take for us to see that?
Dude, I love that question. First, let me just say it like this. When I think about, well, let me start here. To answer your question, I do believe that everything's interconnected. It's all connected. So when we look at it from a technology design and development standpoint, right?
Hmm.
Looking at the, let's start with what's important to train these machines, right? It's data. Data is
Mhm.
what trains all our machine learning, where we're talking the NLUs, or natural language understanding, the natural language processing, even the named entity generations, like images. All this stuff is basically built off of data, right?
Yep.
Here's the challenge when it comes to data, especially when we think of it from a Western society perspective, and arguably just globally, right? There's not enough data that is inclusive.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm not saying that the data doesn't exist. I'm saying that the data that we are currently using to train these machines is not inclusive. And as a result, most data sets that are on the market today, whether we're looking at the ones from universities and research labs to the ones that are kind of like synthetic data created by different people, or private organizations,
Mhm.
too often what we're seeing is that the data that is being collected largely reflects and amplifies and distorts real world perceptions that already exist. It upholds the status quo. And I'm gonna give you a very easy one, right? So this is even getting outside of tech stacks. This is just using something like that a lot of people enjoy. So for example, what's the show Steve Harvey does? Family Feud. Is it Family Feud?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so data, right? When you listen to the answers, right? That the top 5 answers uh for America, or for men, or for women, or for whoever. When you listen to the answers, a lot of times those answers are not as inclusive to a more diverse populace. A lot of times those answers are based off of the sample set that they took, which is largely middle American white people.
Mm.
And honestly, when we start having those conversations, yes, there's a lot of commonalities amongst Americans. But then when we start looking at stuff, so for example, like here in the state of Missouri, if you go to St. Louis, which is on the east side of the state, it's only 3.5 or about 3 hours and 45 minutes away.
Mhm.
They use the term soda a lot to refer to a soda beverage, right?
Yeah.
Carbonated drinks, right?
Yeah.
On the east side, or excuse me, the west side of the state in Kansas City, more people use the term pop,
Mm.
as a reference to that carbonated beverage. Just within one state, you have two different mindsets, right? So, with that being said, when we start looking at data, and if you're only pulling from one sample set and you're not expanding on it over time, of course, you're going to run into issues where when you're training machines, they're only going to, because machines are very intelligent, right?
Hmm.
They learn as they go, hence machine learning, hence artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence, things of that nature. They learn and they adopt and they grow over time. They get smarter, but they can only get smart based off of what they're taught in the beginning. So that's why you run into issues where a lot of machine learnings can, again, reflect and amplify and distort real world perceptions. And the problem with real world perceptions, again, is the data is not inclusive of all
Mm-hmm.
people. So that's how I look at it. It starts with, okay, so then, like, tying into why that is, again, once we step outside of machine and tech space, we start to understand just the social aspects around all this stuff, right? We start looking at how certain groups, and when I say groups, I'm talking about just different people, how their history is not adopted in the classroom, how it's not really elevated in a higher level of academia, um, and a lot of people are just excluded from certain aspects. So it all ties together and goes down to the actual developers, the engineers. If you're not aware enough of thinking inclusively and thinking empathetically, you may see a data set and you will think this is a normal data set because this is what I'm used to understanding. I know these things based off of the data set. So I'm not thinking twice about going in and updating data to be more inclusive because this is normal to me. It all ties together. Does that make sense?
That's a lot of sense. That it's completely true what you're saying. How if you're just seeing it, how you know it is, you're not going to go branch out and
Right.
look towards something new and say, well, there's probably something funny here because it's just that confirmational bias. So
Exactly.
what I'm wondering about is you're saying that there's not a lot of inclusive data. And how do you recommend we get more of that inclusive data? What can we do to create these data sets that are richer?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing to do is, one, acknowledge that
Hmm.
this is how it is. And what I mean by that, to be specific, is that acknowledgement of knowing the history of, not even here in the United States, but just globally, how certain groups of people have just been excluded from the larger frame of history in many ways, right? So that to me is important. Once we acknowledge that, and then then we can start and say, okay, well, how do we fix it? The way that we actually, from a tactical standpoint, approach it is by being more inclusive in our design and development process. So
Hmm.
when we start considering research and we start looking at, okay, where are we going to collect data? How can you be strategic and go into a variety of communities to gain data?
Hmm.
Empirical data, that is, being able to go in and do ethnographic research, to be able to interview people, to be able to um, really try to understand a truly diverse demographic, for at least for that technology, the problem that you're trying to solve, right? That to me is one of the key steps in approaching all this stuff. With that being said, we can leverage kind of like what you talked about earlier. I mean, dude, I, some people in this space, I know some conversational AI people that refuse to use these technologies because they know that these technologies is just collecting data. Like,
Hmm.
it's oftentimes I'm having just a regular conversation and my Google assistant just comes on. I was like, dude,
Yeah.
I did not say, hey, Google. I didn't say anything, but it just pops on. So with that being said, it's really big brother creepy stuff. But what I'm getting at is that technology is already in our hands. It's in our pockets. It's in our desktops. It's in our homes. That technology can be leveraged to start doing a better job of synthesizing this data and collecting it and making the adjustments. Now, what's going to happen there, though, is, one, we start looking at the ethics piece, but then two, just from a development side, that's where it becomes important for the humans to be involved, to be able to understand the data that's being collected and how to basically ensure that that it's inclusive of this larger conversation, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
So I am going to ask a question that might make me sound like a total scumbag, but how can we convince businesses that there is actually a monetary benefit behind this to make them go out and do this stuff, right? Because if it's just like for an inclusion, it is a great idea and it is a great initiative, and I'm all for it. But as we know, businesses run off of profit, right? So
Right.
is there a way, is there something that you can show businesses that says, hey, look, if you do have more inclusion, you stand to gain from it by this amount?
Yeah, man, I love that question. So I believe the best way to do it is to hit them where you know that's going to really pull on their heartstrings, which is
Mm.
the numbers, the dollars, right?
Hmm.
So, for
Yeah.
example, here in the United States, the number one consumer in the United States is Black people. We spend one of currently 1.3 to 1.7 trillion dollars in consumer products. We spend the most money out of any group, yet we only make up about what 12% of the entire populace of the United States, but we spend the most money. Now, a smart business person, and some industries figure this out. You start looking at places like Nike. You start looking at some of the music industry. Especially when they saw how lucrative hip hop was,
Mhm.
they started to figure out, oh, we can make money doing this. And it basically supports their business. Like if you remove Jordan Brand today from Nike, it would not be the same Nike, you know. So when you start, not saying that Black folks are the only ones that buy these products and interact with them, obviously a lot of people do, but when you start looking at the numbers, that's when it becomes, maybe if we were more inclusive, we can make even more money, right? Now,
Mhm.
to answer your question, again, that's going to be one of those things to where you need people, again, from the diverse perspective, the inclusive aspect, to understand the opportunity and to be able to go to these organizations and explain and clearly articulate the true opportunity and the value if it's tapped into, right? If you're already making,
There you
you
go.
know $6 billion on gross revenues, and that's only on one demographic primarily, but you're completely missing the opportunity with this other demographic that has just as much disposable income, that likes playing. I mean, I'll give you another example. One of the early adopters of most technologies, again, is the African American population, right? Most smartphone technology, that is. Okay, the question becomes thinking inclusive and the cultural competence piece. Why is that? Why is it that in the US, Black people are amongst the first ones to adopt smart technology smartphones, and why are they the ones that spend some of the most money in terms of just that technology alone? Well, when you start looking at it from a cultural aspect, there's a lot of households that may not have a dedicated home computer. They may
Mm.
not have a dedicated internet access. But if I have this Boost mobile phone and I want this dope ass iPhone, I may get one for like, 500 bucks, or something like that. Or I can make a payment plan on it. But now I
Mhm.
have access to the internet. When we start looking at things like all pretty much all the social medias, when you start looking at what made TikTok pop, it was the fact that a lot of things were, like you said, in our pre conversation recording. Drake made a song for TikTok. He
Yeah.
made it for TikTok, right? So when you start thinking about culture and you start thinking about, okay, who are the people that are making these moves, these early adopters, when Vine was a thing,
Mhm.
nobody was really messing with Vine before Do It For the Vine came out, and everybody was like, this is so fun. Like those are things that can be monetized, but it takes somebody that's really looking at the opportunity, not in a way to exploit people, but just like, dude, there's an opportunity to elevate certain groups, to really show them that you care, and there's a huge opportunity to monetize on that. So to sum all that up, man, it's one of those things to where it's important for people to understand, how do you do that? How do you get companies to recognize the importance of this? Dude, show them the opportunity of what they're missing. Like,
Mm.
you're making this amount of money already. If you included this group, you could be making 10x, 20x more. And all Western society, capitalist society really care about, if we wanted to be honest, it's the bottom line, it's the money piece, right? So I'm gonna leave it there, man, because I'm gonna get off the soapbox.
Well, I think that also there is another piece to that where what you're talking about, right? Like the culture and how movements are started from sometimes what we would I don't know how to call it, but like from urban movements
Mhm.
and then it becomes more of a whole,
Mainstream thing, yeah.
yeah, a country movement, and then it's a world movement, right?
Yeah.
And I think about that in respect to our chatbot talk, and how there are some words that are definitely not are white words, right? But because they have been culturally appropriated by white people, they now are understood by Siri. Like, I can now tell Siri that it's lit, and that could work. But if you're going to use a bit more slang that the average middle class white young like teenager doesn't use on their day-to-day basis, I would wonder if Siri would understand that, right? So
Right.
there are those ideas of like, oh yeah, the movement starts and then you have this 10x generation of revenue that you talk
Mhm.
about, or potentially like 100x, whatever it is, depending on the thing. So yeah, that's a great case for why we should be getting into it and why we should be more inclusive on it.
Yeah.
And I also wonder about the risk that some of these companies may feel is involved in taking the plunge and getting it wrong. Because right now I've been out of the US for a long time, so I like am very, very cautious how I talk to people in the US,
Yeah.
because everything is racist these days.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of the extreme other side where I sent, this was years ago, but I sent my brother a thumbs up, and it was the black thumbs up, and he told me that's racist, you can't do that. And so I was like, "What? Really? Well, I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna even go there." I
Yeah.
was like, "I don't think it is, but whatever. It doesn't matter to me." So the company that chooses to try to do something and they get it horribly wrong, that's probably a lot of fear that is instilled in someone. And so how can we go about like being inclusive to that company? It's like they're going to try. They are going to, or some of us are going to get it wrong. Some companies are going to get it wrong, but at least they're trying, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So to answer that, man, I believe that, one, is this podcast PG? What's our audience,
No,
man?
it's all that you want. Get as
Okay.
deep down
All right.
and
So
dirty as you need
I have
to.
to I have to ask these things because I want to make sure. Sometimes I have a potty mouth. So we have to get over that shit, man. And what I mean by that is, I'm not saying that we have to get over racism per se, not in a very like all lives matter manner. But what I'm saying is the fear. We have to be responsible. We have to be respectful. We have to be able to approach the conversation and really get to the cause, right?
Mm,
I think one of the biggest challenges that I see in America, arguably the world though, but let's just talk about America for a moment,
mhm,
is the fact that we are so quick to try to solve symptoms, but we never want to talk about the cancer, right?
mm.
We never want to actually, let's solve the actual cancer that's creating this illness within us, right?
Great point.
And the reality is this: when we really break it down, again, one, we understand that the race aspect, America was built from that, right? And there may be people in the audience, they may be like, no, 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 that's BS or whatever. But no, the reality is that's how America was built.
Yeah.
America was, it's in its DNA to this day to where we're still having such a strong racial charge. Now, here's my perspective on that. The reason why our racial charge is so, depending on how you want to look at it, negative,
Mm.
is because we refuse to actually address the racism head on and talk about why does it exist. If we really break that down, then we understand that racism is a construct, the concept of racism, and ultimately it boils down to economics. It boils down to money. Somebody is profiting from it. Whether we wanted to talk about the prison complex today, we want to talk about discrimination and housing. If you want to talk about, go back 400 years and talk about slavery, that's one aspect, and that's just talking about just from the black perspective.
Mhm.
Now, I guess what I'm getting at is companies who are afraid to address these things. I honestly believe they're allowing that fear to be used as an excuse not to break
Mm.
the construct of this racism thing. Now, with that being said, you have to be responsible. You can't just go in and make dumb decisions like what happened a couple years ago with like H&M putting out certain sweaters. I can't remember. It was something about a monkey or something. I can't remember. You have to be, but in H&M's defense, partially, H&M is not a U.S. company. Again, the cultural competence piece around it all, right? With that being said, if you had people on your team who can speak towards those things and say,
Mm.
yo, that's not, let's really consider these things before we make that move. Honestly, to me, that's what it really boils down to. So whether we're talking about a company trying to mitigate their risk and doing the thing wrong, well, the best way to mitigate that is just having the right people in your circle to hold you accountable for things. You're not always going to get it right. You're going to offend somebody no matter what you put out. Whether you put out the most politically correct, socially conscious piece,
Yeah.
you're going to have a lot of people like, yeah, they get it. And you're going to have those other people that's like, you're being racist because you're not, or you're doing something. You're always going to
Not
have
included in this
polarizing
culture.
people, right?
Mhm.
So with that being said, companies cannot be afraid to be inclusive. Now, like I said, man, it's one of those things where you have to be responsible. You have to understand where the law, where the lines draw, to where you're able to walk the path of being inclusive, being culturally competent, but not to the point to where you become offensive to any groups.
Mhm.
Honestly, a lot of it just comes down to having a dope team surrounding you, like, and people who's going
Mhm.
to tell you the truth. Otherwise, you can make those mistakes. But the cool thing about mistakes is you can learn from them. And now you know what not to do next time. So that's
Yeah.
just my perspective on. I don't know if I answered your question or not, Demetrius, but that's just how I
Perfectly.
look at it, man.
Yes, yes, it's great. And now I want to move on to what you're doing currently. I know, and help me pronounce this. It's Awari. Is that
Perfect. Yes,
all right?
Awari.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awari. And can you break down what it is real fast and what you're trying to solve with it?
Yeah, man. So Awari is it's a the way that I'm developing it is a human experience platform. Specifically, I'm looking to do inclusive machine learning. The best way for people that like desserts, right? Let's think of it this way. If you like desserts, you understand that whether you're talking cookies, donuts, I don't know if they call everything overseas, but if you're talking cookies, donuts,
Oh yeah,
pastries of
cake.
different sorts,
Yep.
cakes, uh, a lot of times those things are made with one of the main ingredients is sugar of some sort.
Mhm.
Awari, the way I'm developing it is I want Awari to be sugar. And I want
Mhm.
it to be where it's something that can be sprinkled into different products that are and it becomes inclusive. So for
Oh, nice.
Goodwim, what I'm developing is a human experience platform for the workplace. It's going to be addressing employee engagement, productivity, and feedback. But the most important thing is, as a machine, it's going to be helping business leaders assist them in making equitable decisions within their organization. ultimately fostering more equitable opportunity for people in the workplace. So what exactly does that mean? It means, for example, let's say, Demetrius, you've been working at chatbots IO for the past, 2 years.
Hmm.
And based off of all the feedback you had in your team, because your company does continuous feedback all year round, 360 continuous feedback, based off the feedback that you've been receiving, you will make a great lead for this upcoming project that you're going to be doing with Goodwim, helping them develop a new chat box. You will be a great leader on your team. But for whatever reason, Demetrius, over the past 2 years, because you're more of a quiet person, you're not the most outspoken person, your manager doesn't always, reach out to you to be one of those lead people. They'll come to Lewis because Lewis talks a lot and I'm the most loudest person in the room, right?
Yeah.
But what Awari will do in this instance is say, hey, manager, you should consider Demetrius for this role because based off of his feedback over the past 6 months, based off of his career path and all these things, he will be a good person for this position. Consider him. All it's doing is nudging people to think beyond their comfort, their confirmation, their comfort, their affinity, what they're used to. So
Mm.
basically, the goal is to provide insights on these equitable opportunities within the workplace. That makes sense.
Yeah, I find that brilliant, and it reminds me of something that I was doing back in college. Was working. I was volunteering with this student organization group called
Hmm.
ISEC, and the whole thing about ISEC was that we would open up internships at companies in the U.S. and then bring over people from anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
And the whole sell on that was you were getting someone from a different culture, a different mindset, a different view, and they were going to open up your reality in your workplace, and
Yeah.
it was going to change that. So now this is a bit like, I look at it like a bit of an automated way of doing that. You're helping people see outside of their boxes or their blinders on, and you're taking off the blinders in a way.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And that's the goal of it, is to like I said, equitable opportunity, and it's for all employees. So it's not just about the race component. It's looking at who anybody who is deserving of an opportunity within the organization. And then in addition to that, it's doing other humanistic things. For example, so many people have a day to day and they just do their work, they do their work. It's
Mm,
other things to create a company culture that people want to stay at. Because again, when we think about
yeah.
company culture, retention is important, right? So
Mhm.
things as simple, a humanistic thing as simple as, if I'm out sick for the past 4 or 5 days, Awari is going to remind my manager to say, hey, you should check on Lewis. He's been
Mm.
out for 4 to 5 days. Now, some people may say, well, what the hell does that have to do with anything? The reality is this: those small little nudges, that's what create company culture, where people feel like they belong. Because most businesses, that humanistic piece, as much as they talk about, their employees as their greatest assets, they treat their employees like, this is going to be funny, like robots, right? They
Yep.
don't really take them into consideration. But if with this technology is going to allow, my goal is to have it assist people to start putting those humanistic nuggets back into people to do basic things like, yes, there's the equitable piece, which is very tangible, very important, but these subtle things also create company culture of belongingness. And in
Mm.
terms, going back to the bottom line, if I retain my top talent, guess what? I make more money, I can scale, I
Yep.
can grow the business. So this is all a play on trying to help companies scale and grow, but doing it in a manner that feels good, like for most people.
Yeah. Well, it's a very noble cause. I really appreciate that you're doing that. I want to ask one more, and please don't feel like I am sh- having any shots fired on this, but I think
Yeah,
there's a very interesting ethical question to look at
yeah,
because I was reading a little bit about it, and I know there is a piece, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a piece of it that is like, it can read over your different texts potentially on
Yes.
Slack, and it will say if someone is leaning towards, if they're not being inclusive, or they're
Yeah.
not, or they are potentially, it's like, well, that guy's a full-blown racist.
Yeah.
And so the ethical issue I have here is that me, as not so much towards what you're doing, but me towards my like boss, I don't necessarily want them to have all of my chats, right? Like I don't want them to be able to have all of that. And
Hmm.
but I'm not going to say no if they say, "Hey, we got to have this new program scan all of your Slack messages to make sure that you aren't racist." And
Yeah.
so I can't say no to that because then I'll look like a racist.
Yeah. So to address that, so two things. First, if you're using company paraphernalia, like so computers, software, whatever, and it's company owned, it's not your data. It's the company's data to begin with. So no matter what you put on that Slack box, if you're flirting with the girl over in accounting or whatever, hey, it's the company's data. You should have been, busting your move outside company walls. So that being said, that's the company's data. And a lot more companies, I think one study I found, I think it's 43% of business leaders now want control, or they are more interested in this kind of data within the
Mhm.
organization. uh in comparison to like 2 years ago, it was only like 15% of companies
Mhm.
that cared and saw it being a problem in terms of just the ethics piece. So with that being said, twofolds. One, it's not your data, it's the company's data because you're using company stuff. Companies are
Mhm.
already doing it anyway, right?
Yeah.
They're not really leveraging the data in the way that I'm talking about. Two, my goal with the technology is to help protect people's anonymity. Behind it is, it's on the negative pieces, it's not going to specifically call out an individual. It's
Mm.
going to look at your company culture altogether. So if, based off of all the feedback, all the information that's coming through, if your company culture is showing a negative sentiment towards different groups, or towards women,
Mm.
gender, or
I
certain
see.
ages, that's how you kind of help protect. Because now we're saying, I'm not saying Demetrius is a full blown racist. Obviously, you're not. But I'm not saying that, right? I'm saying that based off of this data, your company is showing these things, and here are ways to improve it. All this
Mm.
is about is helping companies mitigate their risk in that aspect to help protect them, so you don't run into events where a employee puts out a memo talking about
Yeah.
women and people of color are inferior in technology, and becomes widespread. If you can catch that before it happens, and you can start addressing those things sooner within a company culture context, that gives you a much stronger opportunity to not run into those issues. Now, where will Awari becomes specific is more so on the positive things, like the example I used earlier, the
Mm.
equitable
Okay.
opportunity piece. So it's like, if there's an individual or a list of individuals who will be a good fit for certain internal roles, or they should be given the opportunity, that's where Awari will go granular and say, like, consider this list of people. But to help protect people, and I know it almost sounds counterproductive because you will feel like, oh, I want to get rid of these people out of the company. The way
Yeah.
that I see it, though, is this, though. The reality is, the way that some of these things play out, it's not just one individual.
Mm.
It becomes one of those things to where this is a culture that we have, if not created, we support it. So we have to address the culture that is allowing an individual to feel comfortable to have these things here. Does that make sense? So that's why I'm
Yeah.
saying it's not from the negative side. I'm not saying I don't, at this point, I don't want Awari to drill down on an individual. I want Awari to look at, again, the cause. The cause being our company culture has this type of energy around it.
Yeah, and it goes
So
back to that whole idea of the not addressing the symptoms, but really looking at the root. And I think
Exactly.
that that's brilliant, especially knowing there's certain company cultures that are like it's famous, right? Like I think Uber and Snapchat have these company cultures, the bro culture.
Yeah.
And so, how can you address that and how can you help fix that before, like you said, somebody puts out a letter and then it's just on the nighttime news, if
Yeah.
anybody still watches that. But
Exactly.
it's a brilliant idea. And I love that. I love and thank you for clarifying because I was a little bit like,
Yeah.
I don't know about the ethical issues there. And I do know that one thing that we talked to another guest about was where do we draw the line of what we can get from that data that the
Yeah.
company is collecting? Because one of these thought experiments that we went over was, let's say that I am on a company computer using my trackpad, and after lunch, the data shows that I'm a bit more jittery when I use my
Mm.
trackpad. So
Yeah.
now the company knows that, hey, what happens at lunch? What do you do? Have you been drinking a few? And so they can come to me and start saying, like, oh, you're working drunk. And these
Mm.
days, I think what you were mentioning, the sentiment from the leaders, they want to know more about this. I'm sure it's only been amplified because of the whole work from home movement.
Yeah.
And so for me, there is a very fine line on what we can do
Mhm.
and what we can't. I think what you're trying to do, it walks that line perfectly. And
Yeah.
especially when you talk about how you want to give these benefits to people who would not necessarily be included. And you
Yeah.
want to make sure that it is more inclusive. You want to make sure that it has a greater reach than just the same old people being promoted or
Mhm.
being put to lead projects. And then if you could get an idea of your company and how it is, that is gold, right? Like
Yeah.
as a CEO, you want to know if that's happening because you don't necessarily see it. You're not on the ground level. So you
Yeah.
can't tell necessarily if your company is leaning one way or the other, or if they are discriminatory towards one group or the other.
Mhm.
So that is a great cause. I really enjoy it, and I want to leave you with the last words. Do you have
Uh,
anything to say before my last question?
Dude.
Actually, I have one more question, but
Okay.
I'll leave you with the last words.
Okay, I can do the last words. Well, my last word is this. Currently, Awari is in development.
Mm,
With that being said, I am. Can I promote here? I don't know. I'm
of
not really.
course,
So,
feel
two
free.
things I'm looking for, right? So, one is I'm looking for bold companies who sees the opportunity and the benefit with this technology, and I want
Mm,
to work with them and get them a part of what I call the Awari circle, right? And
nice.
those companies who are really about trying to create equitable, inclusive workplaces. Secondly, I am also in a process of raising funds so I can build out
Mm,
the rest of my team. So I am looking for either angel investors or VC investors who just want to have a conversation. We don't know if it's going to be a good partnership or fit right now, but more importantly, like let's talk about it and let's see if it makes sense for both of us, right? And then if so, let's go out here and change the world. One workplace that was starting in a workplace. Because
nice.
again, real quick, going back to the ingredients piece, right? So the foundation of Awari, again, I'm starting in HR workplaces, but the goal with the technology is to move it into other areas where equity can be used. So fintech, so financial technology, looking
Hmm.
at education, looking at healthcare, because I believe all these things, like I said earlier in the conversations, everything's interconnected. Well, we need
Hmm.
more equity in a lot of areas in society. My goals, my hopes, my aspirations, my belief is that Awari will serve as a foundational component to assist people in becoming more equitable. And I'm emphasizing assist. I'm not trying to replace humanity because
Hmm.
we need our intellect. This tool is literally a tool to assist us to do what we are kind of wired to do. Just make us more efficient at it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, last question:
Go ahead.
Are you a robot?
Dude, we're all robots in some capacity, right? It just depends. That's how I look at it. I think everybody's a robot. It's just depending on if you're like a smart robot or not a smart robot. uh yeah, I don't know, man. Honestly, I think I'm an alien. Like, yeah, you ask my wife, she's gonna say I'm an alien. So I'm gonna leave with that.
Awesome, Lewis. This has been incredible talking to you. I really appreciate the time that you took to spend with us to break down some of these topics that, again, we don't talk about enough. I think, like you mentioned, we need to bring these out. We need to have conversations around this stuff because otherwise, it's just going to stay in the back of our minds. It's going to stay over on some corner where it doesn't get the attention that it needs. And for us to move forward as a society, we need to talk about this stuff. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you being here,
Yeah,
talking to us about it.
I appreciate you having me on, man. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
No problem. So that will conclude our session of Are You a Robot podcast. Thank you again for listening. And if you would like to join us and talk more about all of this stuff, please check out our Slack workspace. You can find the link to that below.